Welcome to Unit 3 live discussion. I meant to get this posted by Friday, but I failed to. But I'll get it up here on the class site. Had a scheduling conflict on Thursday night, so we couldn't do the live recording with the classroom participation. But so let's go right into this week's learning activities. So we're in chapter 4, where we're talking about loops and files. We'll talk about the increment and decrement operators, the while loop, using the while loop for validation, the do while loop, and the for loop. Let me open up this PowerPoint. Okay. So we're also going to be discussing nested loops, the break and continue statements, deciding which loop to use, introduction to file input and output, and how do we generate random numbers with the random class. So the increment and decrement operators, there are numerous times where a variable must simply be incremented or decremented. Java provides a shortened ways to increment this and decrements a variable's value. Use the plus plus or the minus minus operators, and this is done quickly. For example, you'll see the next example, which shows an increment decrement Java file. So the difference between prefix and postfix. So when an increment or decrement are the only operations in a statement, there is no difference between prefix and postfix notations. When used in an expression, you'll see that the prefix notation indicates the variable is incremented or decremented prior to the rest of the equation. Postfix is after, indicates the variable will be incremented or decremented after the rest of the equation or evaluation. What is the while loop? Java provides 3 different looping structures. The while loop has the form while the condition exists. This is the statement. While the condition is true, the statement will execute repeatedly. While loop is a pre-test loop, which means that it will test the value of the condition prior to executing the loop. While loop must be taken to set the condition to false. Somewhere in the loops, the loop will end. Loops that do not end are called infinite loops. A while loop executes 0 or more times if the condition is false. The loop will not execute. This is an example of the while loop flowchart. Infinite loops. Infinite loops are used in order for a while loop to end. The condition must become false. The following loop will not end. The variable x never gets decremented, so it will always be greater than 0. Infinite loops. This version of the loop decrements x during each iteration. Block statements in loops. There are curly braces are required to enclose block statements of while loops, like block if statements. The while loop for input validation. Input validation is a process of ensuring that users' input is valid. The do while loop is a post-test loop, which means it will execute the loop prior to testing the condition. The do while loop, sometimes called a do loop, takes this form. Do statements while this condition exists. Here's an example of the do while loop flowchart. The for loop. The for loop is a pre-test loop. It allows the programmers to initiate a control variable, test a condition, and modify the control variable all in one line of code. This is an example of the for loop flowchart. The sections of the for loop, they are the initialization section of the for loop allows the loop to initialize its own control variable. The test section acts in the same manner as the condition section of a while loop. Update section for the loop is the last thing to execute at the end of each loop. Typically, for loops initialize a counter, a variable that will be tested by the test section of the loop and updated by the update section. The update expression. Update expression is usually used to increment or decrement the count of variables declared in the initialization section of the for loop. Modifying the control variable. Multiple initializations and updates. A for loop may initialize and update multiple variables. How do you modify the control variable? You should avoid updating the control variable of a for loop within the body of the loop. The update section should be used to update the control variable. Updating the control variable in the for loop leads to hard to maintain the code and difficult for debugging. Loops allow the programs to keep running totals while evaluating data. Imagine needing to keep a running total of user input. This is the logic for calculating a running total. Setting a value can be used to notify the program to stop acquiring input. If it is a user input, the user could be prompted to input the data, not normally in the input data range. Programs that get file input typically use the end of file marker to stop acquiring input data. Let's go back one. There we go. What are nested loops? Nested loops are like if statements. Loops can be nested. If a loop is nested, the inner loop will execute all of its iterations for each time the outer loop executes once. The loop statements in this example will execute 100 times. What is a break statement? Break statement is used to abnormally terminate a loop. Use of the break statement in loops bypasses the normal mechanisms and makes the code hard to read and maintain. It is considered bad form to use the break statement in this manner. Continue statement. Continue statement will cause the current executing iteration of a loop to terminate and the next iteration will begin. The continue statements will cause the evaluation of the condition in while and for loops. Like the break statement, the continue statement should be avoided because it makes the code hard to read and debug. But how do you decide which loops to use? Well, the while loop, you want to use it. The pretest loop, use it where you do not want the statements to execute if the condition is false in the beginning. The do while loop, you want to use it where you want the statements to execute at least one time, post-test loop. And the for loop, it's a pretest loop, and you want to use it where there is some type of counting variable that can be calculated. File and input and output, re-entering data all the time could get tedious for the user. The data can be saved to a file. Files have to be opened. Data is then written to the file. File must be closed prior to program termination. In general, these are two types of files, binary and text. This is an example of writing text to a file. This is an example of the printer writer class. What does it do? It allows you to write data to a file using the print and print line methods as you've been using to display data on the screen. Print method writes data without writing the new line character. Example of a print writer class. Exceptions. What are exceptions? Exceptions when something unexpected happens in a Java program, an exception is thrown. The method that is executing when the exception is thrown must either handle the exception or pass it up the line. Handling the exception will be discussed later. To pass up the line, the method needs a throw clause in the method header. This is how you insert a throw clause in a method header. How do you append text to a file? To avoid erasing a file that already exists, create a file writer object in this manner. Then you create a print writer object in this manner. This is how you specify a file location. Fortunately, Java allows Unix-style file names using the / to separate directories. This is something that's unique to Java. This is how you read data from a file. Example. So how do you detect the end of a file? The scanner class has next method will return true if another item can be read from the file. This is an example of the code. How do you generate random numbers with the random class? Some applications such as games, simulations, require the use of randomly generated numbers. So the Java API has a class, random, it's called random. For this purpose, to use the random class, use the following import statement and create an instance of the class. So this is some methods of the random class. The method would be next double. See that it returns the next random number as a double. The number will be within the range of 0 and 1.0. Next float, the next random number as a float. Next int returns the next random number as an int. And the next int n, this method accepts the integer argument n. It returns a random number as an int. So this week, for conclusion, we took a look at loops and files, the increment and decrement operators, the while loop, using the while loop for input validation, the do while loop, the do for loop, running totals and sentinel values, nested loops, the break and continue statements, deciding which loop to use, introduction to the file input and output, and how do you generate random numbers with the random class, and some common errors to avoid. So this concludes this week's live discussion. I'll post the time for this upcoming week's live discussion. As we move into next week, we'll do the live discussion on Friday night at around 6 p.m. or 1800 for your military folks, versus doing it on Thursday. All right, hope everybody has a good week. Thank you. Bye-bye.